Imagine this. It is 1996. Draft night. The biggest night of any young basketball player's life. The arena is electric. Names are being called one by one. Cameras flash. Families cry tears of joy. Young men in suits walk across that stage and shake hands with their future. And somewhere, in a quiet room, a young man sits watching all of this unfold on television. Round 1 passes. His name is not called. Round 2 begins. The last picks are disappearing fast. He leans forward. He waits. He prays. And then, silence. The draft ends. Every single team in the NBA passed on him. Not one phone call. Not one chance. Nothing. In the world of professional basketball, that moment usually means one thing. The dream is over. But here is what nobody in that room understood that night. The man they all ignored was about to become the most feared defender in NBA history. He would win Defensive Player of the Year 4 times, a feat matched by almost no one. He would stand face to face with Shaquille O'Neal, the most physically dominant center the sport has ever seen, and make him work harder than almost any opponent ever did. He would lead a team with 0 offensive superstars to defeat the most star-studded lineup in NBA history and win an NBA championship. And in 2021, he would walk into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame as the first undrafted player in history to ever receive that honor. His name is Ben Wallace. And I promise you, by the time this video is over, you will understand why his story is not just the greatest underdog story in basketball. It is one of the greatest stories in the history of human persistence. But to truly understand what he achieved, you have to go back to the very beginning. Not to the NBA arenas. Not to the Detroit Pistons locker room. You have to go back to a tiny, forgotten town in Alabama. A house with 11 children. Red dirt roads. A rusty old hoop. And a mother who taught her son that life would give him nothing for free. Because that is where this story actually starts. Whitehall, Alabama. If you look it up on a map, you will barely find it. A small, poor, rural community where the roads were made of red dirt and the future of most families was decided long before the children were even born. This is where Ben Wallace came into the world. Not into a basketball academy. Not into a family with connections. Into a small, simple house shared by 11 children, where every single meal had to be carefully divided and luxury was a word that simply did not exist. His mother, Sadie Wallace, was not famous. She was not a businesswoman or an athlete. She was a Southern mother, iron tough, deeply loving, and raising 11 children on almost nothing. She did not allow laziness. Every morning in that house began with work. The Wallace children helped tend the farm, looked after livestock, handled chores before the sun had fully risen. From the time Ben could walk and understand, he knew one truth that would stay with him his entire life. Nobody is going to hand you anything. You have to take it yourself. There were no brand new sneakers in that house. No expensive training equipment. The basketball court where young Ben Wallace first learned to play was nothing more than a patch of red dirt with a rickety old hoop nailed somewhere nearby. No coach. No crowd. No cameras. Just a boy, a ball, and the burning Alabama heat. But that humble little court was where something began to form inside Ben Wallace that no expensive training program could have built. Hunger. Not for food, though that was real too. But hunger to be something. To escape. To prove that the boy from the poor house on the red dirt road could do what nobody expected him to do. While kids across America were playing on polished wooden courts with leather balls and professional coaches, Ben Wallace was out on that dirt, teaching himself to fight for every single rebound, to jump higher than anyone expected, to never quit no matter how tired he was. Poverty can destroy people. It destroys most people. But for Ben Wallace, it became a slow-burning fire that would take years to fully ignite, and decades to go out. When Ben Wallace entered high school at Central High, he threw himself into sports completely. Basketball. Football. Baseball. He wasn't choosing between them. He needed all of them. Each sport built something different in him. Football built raw power and absolute fearlessness in contact. Baseball sharpened his focus and reflexes. But basketball was where his heart lived. The problem was simple and cruel. Ben Wallace was not a scorer. In American high school basketball, scouts, coaches and recruiters look for one thing above everything else. Points. Beautiful jump shots. Explosive dunks. The highlight reel. Wallace had none of that. What he had was something far harder to see and far harder to appreciate. He could stop people. He could make the game miserable for anyone who drove into the paint. He could grab rebounds over players much bigger than him. He could block shots that seemed impossible to block. One day, his coach looked at Wallace during practice and said something that would become the philosophy of his entire life. If you can't score, then stop everyone else from scoring. For most players, that would feel like an insult, a reminder of what they lack. For Wallace, it was a revelation. He stopped trying to be what he wasn't, and he started becoming the most extreme version of what he already was. But the basketball world did not notice. Senior year came. Players around him started receiving scholarship offers, letters from big universities, calls from coaches at Division I programs. Wallace's phone stayed quiet. No scouts flew to Alabama to watch him. No coaches promised him a future. And slowly, quietly, the cruelest message began to settle over his world. You are not good enough. Most people accept that message. Most people let it end the dream. Ben Wallace did not. Without a scholarship to a major university, Wallace took the only path available to him. He started at Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland. No television coverage. No national attention. No NBA scouts in the stands. Just a small gymnasium and a young man refusing to disappear. Then he moved to Virginia Union University, a Division II school. Even further from the spotlight. Even further from the NBA dream. Division II basketball barely exists on the radar of the professional league. The games are not on television. The players are not written about in national newspapers. For almost every player who reaches Division II, the NBA remains a fantasy. But in that low-light environment, something remarkable happened. Ben Wallace became a monster. Game after game, he dominated the paint with a ferocity that coaches and opponents had never seen at that level. His rebounding numbers were staggering. His blocks turned the paint into a no-fly zone. No matter how much bigger or stronger his opponents were, Wallace flew at them with the same relentless aggression every single time. He became the heart of the Virginia Union team. The engine. The defensive anchor around which everything else was built. But the outside world still did not know his name. On long bus rides back from games, Wallace would sit and stare out the window and ask himself the question that haunted him every single day. Is this actually going anywhere? He had given everything. He was getting better every year. But the NBA still felt impossibly far away. He did not know that the biggest pain of his career was still coming. A single night that would test his will more than anything before it. June 26, 1996. NBA Draft Night. Wallace had done everything he could. He had dominated Division II basketball. He had worked harder than anyone around him. He carried the quiet, desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, one NBA team had noticed. He sat and watched as names were called. Round 1. 60 picks total. Wallace watched 30 names go by. Not his. Round 2 began. The final 30 picks. Last chances? Wallace leaned forward. Pick after pick disappeared. And then the final name was announced. Silence. Ben Wallace was not drafted. Not by anyone. Not a single one of 30 NBA franchises saw enough in him to use even their very last pick on his name. In the professional basketball world, that is not just a disappointment. That is a verdict. It is the league collectively saying, you do not belong here. That night, Ben Wallace sat with one of the hardest feelings a human being can experience. Not failure from trying and losing, but rejection before even being given the chance to try. He remembered his mother. He remembered the red dirt courts. He remembered every coach who told him his offensive game was too limited. Every scout who never showed up. Every door that quietly closed without explanation. And in that silence, he made a decision. He was not going to accept this. He did not know how yet. He did not have a plan. He had no connections, no agent working miracles, no famous name to trade on. All he had was the same thing he had always had. An absolutely unbreakable refusal to quit. After scraping his way into the league through Washington and then Orlando, years of bench minutes, uncertainty and proving himself over and over, Ben Wallace arrived in Detroit in the year 2000. Nobody noticed. The trade was about Grant Hill, the Pistons superstar heading to Orlando. Wallace was the forgotten name going the other direction. A footnote in someone else's deal. But Detroit was different. For the first time in his career, Wallace was in a system built around exactly what he did. Defense. Discipline. Toughness. The Pistons did not need him to score. They needed him to make scoring impossible for everyone else. And Ben Wallace became something the NBA had never quite seen before. He was not just a good defensive player. He was a force of nature. Every time an opponent drove into the paint, they met a wall. His blocks did not just stop shots, they sent a message. His rebounds were not just statistics, they were declarations that this territory belonged to him. Chauncey Billups controlled the tempo. Richard Hamilton never stopped moving. Tayshaun Prince disrupted everything with his impossibly long arms. Rasheed Wallace brought fire and power. But the soul of that team, the heartbeat, was always Big Ben. Detroit fans fell in love with him completely. His massive afro became an icon. His cold, fearless expression before every battle became a symbol of the city itself. Detroit, a city of workers, of people who labor hard and ask for nothing to be handed to them, recognized in Ben Wallace something deeply familiar. He was one of them. And in 2004, when the Detroit Pistons walked into the NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers, a team with Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant, Karl Malone and Gary Payton, the entire basketball world expected Detroit to be destroyed. Instead, Ben Wallace stood in the paint and refused to move. The Lakers' superstar machine sputtered. Shaq was made to work for every single touch. Kobe found no easy paths. Detroit won 4-1. NBA champions? The man no team wanted in the 1996 draft was holding the trophy. Years passed. Wallace played on through Chicago and Cleveland. His body slowed, as every athlete's body eventually does. The minutes decreased. The battles became harder. And then his playing days were done. For years after retirement, Wallace waited. The Hall of Fame honors came for others. Big scorers. Famous names. Players the highlight reels loved. Wallace waited. Because basketball, like life, has always been slower to recognize the people who do the hard, unglamorous, essential work. And then in 2021, the call came. Ben Wallace was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame. And when that announcement was made, one fact stood above everything else. Ben Wallace became the first undrafted player in NBA history to be inducted into the Hall of Fame. Let that land for a moment. In a league that did not want him. In a sport that overlooked him his entire life. In a world that told a poor boy from Alabama that he was simply not good enough. History ultimately said something completely different. When Wallace stood on that stage, he was not just representing himself. He was representing every player told they were too small, too limited, not flashy enough. Every kid playing on a red dirt court with no scouts watching. Every young person sitting in a room while the world moves on without calling their name. He was proof that rejection is not a verdict. It is just a delay. Ben Wallace did not become a legend despite everything he suffered. He became a legend because of it. Because poverty taught him to fight for what he needed. Because being overlooked taught him to outwork everyone watching. Because draft night 1996 lit a fire in him that never, not once, went out. The boy from Whitehall, Alabama. 11 siblings. Red dirt roads. A rusty old hoop. Hall of Fame. First undrafted player. Ever. Some legends are chosen from the beginning. Their path is straight and bright, and celebrated every step of the way. Ben Wallace's path was crooked, painful, dark and long. But it led to exactly the same place. And that, more than any championship, more than any award, is the most powerful thing his story teaches us. Your starting point does not decide your destination. Your will does. If this story moved you, subscribe now. Because every week, we bring you the journeys of the men and women who refuse to disappear. And Ben Wallace is just the beginning.